Ozzy Beal. I'm going to be presenting today. So, first of all, I'm going to bring to light a case of a young Christian teenager in a North Carolina public school. He complains about the Muslim prayers being demonstrated weekly at the football games. In addition to this, the Islamic symbolism and activities being held daily at school. During these prayers, he feels very uncomfortable and estranged from his friends and teachers. Can we all empathize with this child who feels alone, surrounded by people, saying prayers that he doesn't understand or align with? Now, what if I were to say that the opposite is true? That there is actually a case in Georgia where a young Muslim boy complained of the Christian prayers happening at football games and symbolisms in school. Could you still understand that seclusion from his peers, the uncomfortability and the weirdness of subjecting someone to beliefs that are not their own, especially in a government-funded institution? Now, some people would say that religion belongs in school, that it belongs in government. But I would have to disagree, because I have done extensive research regarding this topic, analyzing and evaluating sources and peer-reviewed journals, and from this I have concluded that there are major consequences of the integration of church and state. This includes the rise in extremist groups, the isolation of minorities, and the threat of dissolution of human rights. So first, we're going to clarify what is the separation of church and state. First, mentioned vaguely in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, it says, "Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion." This is understood to mean that no religion can be favored by the government more than any other, that the government cannot establish a national religion, and that no government institution can fund a religious one. This applies federally and stately, and one way that government officials determine whether or not laws abide by this Establishment Clause is the Lemon Test. And according to Chief Justice Earl Warren, the Lemon Test consists of 3 requirements: that the law must have a singular secular legislative purpose, that it must not advance or inhibit any religious institution, and that it must not foster an excessive entanglement with any religion. So, what is the first major consequence? The first is the rise in extremist groups. According to Caroline Corbin of the Alabama Law Review, extremist groups are prone to rise in areas that lack that separation of church and state. It allows for the combination of the identities of religious identities and national identities. So if someone is Christian and white in these areas, most likely they combine that identification with that Americanism, believing that that other people who do not fit into that identity are less valid as Americans. And this brings hostility towards those other races and individuals that don't match into that. Specific groups such as the white nationalists, the Proud Boys, the KKK, and the neo-Nazis are all examples of people who have combined that religious and national identity. In addition to that, you also have the polarization of political parties. Because of that lack of understanding and empathy towards other groups who don't match their own personal identity, you go from people who are in the middle to push to the outside who can't compromise with the other groups. So, the next major consequence is intolerance and isolation of minorities. As mentioned in the New Yorker by Louis Menand, the special case of Lum versus Rice, we have a young Chinese girl with her family who had just immigrated to Mississippi. And in Mississippi, at this time, there is a white and there is a non-white school. Now, because this state allows for the integration of church and state, the non-white school severely lacks funding. But when the Rice family's daughter went to go to the white school, which provided adequate education, she was denied entrance. Then, having to go to the non-white school and realizing the extreme lack of educational excellence, she was then forced to leave the state to someplace else that was more accepting of other religious and ethnic groups. In addition to this, Christopher P. Skettle brings to our attention the religious-related conflict in areas that that have a combination of that church and state. There is 3 times as many Jewish people and Muslim people that experience disrespect and hostility in these areas than Christians do. They were verbally abused, chased and followed, had their homes vandalized, and were harassed by police. So not only is it harassment, but it's also that lack of education that forces minorities to leave these areas, to isolate themselves in areas that are accepting. The next major consequence is threat to human rights. When researching, I found that sources, Very Well Health and NPR, found that in 2020, the laws protecting against healthcare discrimination were dissolved, allowing for people of different race, sexual orientation, religion, disability, and healthcare programs and other activities were allowed to be discriminated against by their healthcare providers. And in addition, so because of the political parties, or because of the politicians' religious beliefs, they were able to implement discrimination against people who did not fit into their ideas. And this resulted in a healthcare crisis. It has since been resolved, but we still have this example as an idea of how the integration of church and state can be a threat to human rights. In addition, we have an exclusive interview from Clarence Thompson, held by Adam Eldman, in which the Supreme Court Justice, talks about how after overturning Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court plans to overturn Griswold versus Connecticut, Lawrence versus Texas, and Obergefell versus Hodgins. All 3 of these cases allow for the marriage of same-sex people and the access to contraceptive of all married people. So, if these politicians are able to overthrow past cases based on their own religious beliefs and able to deny same-sex marriage, who is to say that they wouldn't also deny interracial marriage if they align with these white Christian beliefs? So, in conclusion, the integration of church and state puts at threat our human rights, isolates minorities, and allows for the rise in extremist groups. And I hope that with this presentation, you can go forth and elect candidates that help build up a wall between these two entities. That you can see the effects of combining church and state and understand how you can help in your community of protecting those that are like you, but also those that are not like you. Here are my citations. If you would like a copy or to talk more about them with me, please let me know. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you guys for attending.